Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
All right, people, welcome to our newly formed show. Have you seen this stuff? Where we discuss the latest goings on in the world of education with my esteemed guests, Nathan, Rae, and Yasmin, just to churn over the things that have been happening out there in education land. It's been plenty. So we're going to talk it all through. How are you guys doing? All right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Love Island at 9 o'clock.
Well,
Is
countdown
it
started.
No, it's been on for about a week.
No, fair play. All right. Oh, yeah, I remember you said ages ago you like that.
I'm obsessed with it, I'll be honest. Every year I say that I'm going to quit and I just can't. It's like Coke.
Fair play.
I'm not engaging.
Transcript. Isn't watching the video.
No.
Okay, Nathan.
No, I'm appalled that Love Island is a thing, that people would watch it. I think it's a, that's probably, has there ever been a teacher on Love Island?
There's actually a teacher. Yeah, there've been quite a few. One of them actually won. There's a male teacher, ex-teacher that actually won a couple of years ago. And also there's currently a teaching assistant in this series that's come in as a bombshell. Yeah, there's quite a few, but they're usually male.
Vain. I feel that it should be on DBS checks.
Yeah, I mean, since since September 2023, I think I was at a DSL at the time. I think you've been allowed to Google teachers, and that's good enough. If someone's been on Love Island, you would definitely know if you'd done a proper Google.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I don't know. I've never watched it. But I have strong opinions about it anyway.
Typical.
And they are negative. Indeed. If I wasn't being clear enough, they are negative opinions about it. And
well, today I have done sports day. And got a little bit burnt, as you do. As I do quite regularly. Also, one of my former students, so I used to teach a number of years ago. I think I taught him from maybe 2015 to 2019, from year 8 to year 10, 11 sort of times. He's just signed for Wolves, 23 million euros.
Congrats to him. I thought you were going to say something really sad there.
No,
yeah, congrats to him.
No, he's just signed today. 23 million.
At the time, did you obviously I guess he played for the school team, was county or whatever, but did you know that he was that good?
No, I mean I obviously I knew him well. It was a relatively small school. I was his form tutor. I also taught him history.
Aww.
I still chat with him now. He still calls me Mr. Rogers, which I find hilarious. When he's,
he will call you that forever.
Yeah, he's making it happen. Yeah. No, in fairness, yes, you could see he was very talented, but you didn't. That's the funny thing. It's what it has sort of shown me is some of it is about mentality, because he's a really nice guy, really intelligent, hardworking, and I remember his mum. I met because I went to a game last season at Celta where he's just, I think transferring from according to Sky Sports. I went to watch him at Celta back in would have been January, and his mum reminded me of a meeting where she came in to speak to me when I was his form tutor, and I said to her, "Don't worry, like I think he's gonna make it in football." I said that to her. She was like, "Mr. Rogers, I remember this meeting when I was feeling really nervous about whether he could make it because they sent him off to England to an academy and then he came back to Spain and whatever." And apparently I said that. So I get all the credit.
You knew.
Well done.
You just not just history, you talent spotting across the board.
Just doing it all, mate. No, but to be fair, sometimes somebody makes it happen and you couldn't wish it was a nicer person that would happen with. And he would definitely fall into that bracket. Because let's be honest, some footballers are a little bit cocky, a little bit, maybe a bit of a, I wouldn't go as far as attitude problem, but, it can get that arrogance and that cockiness and not having time for people and not, all that sort of stuff. And he's nothing like that. Maybe that's a stereotype of footballers, but just the ones that I've met in my life who've been really good have just had touches of that. So maybe that's colouring my perceptions a little bit.
I think that's fair.
And he's not like that. So I really, hope it works out for him.
Yeah, good luck to him.
Yeah. Back to reality. How was it Sports Day today? There was no £23 million signing of Mr. Rogers for Everton today happening. Ray, what about you? Anything?
I got a card from a year 11.
All right.
It's like the highlight of my day.
All right.
They finally left. So, yeah. That's
all right.
I spent the day tidying my classroom in the office, and that's pretty much all I'm doing now that I actually have some game time. Nothing
I was just going to ask, not to make it personal though, but like game time is so different in different schools. Like when year 11 leave, there are some teachers that I envy, and then there are some that I worry for.
Yeah.
Because some people just end up, like I've been in a school where you don't really get game time. You get more lessons when year 11 go. And you're on way more cover, and you're like recreating the whole curriculum, and you're essentially just doing more. Like it gets to a point where you just wish the year 11s would come back. I've been there. But I've also had the game time where I've done nothing but like run around the school and just disturb like different faculties. I guess it just depends where you are.
I've had all of the above and everything in between, but it's also changed over time. So this is my third TTR show in 3 days, and all three of them have mentioned this. So it's like, it's the only thing. It's like I'm full of game time rage right now. So this week, yesterday and today were the only, bar one lesson in the past, the only days that I've actually got some time back from year 11 not being here. And I haven't been asked to cover. I haven't been told to do something. I've just been allowed to actually like help organize the English office because I wanted to organize my classroom, because those are things I wanted to do. But at the end of the week, I think we're going to be given our list of things to get done. So it's all going to go to pot very soon, but at least we'll have some time to do something. I don't. The whole thing's a joke.
I don't get game time. I teach Key Stage 4, but because we're an intervention unit type approach, as soon as my year 11s go, I get a new group of year 9s and we transition them in early. And so I've basically started September early. So I'm already with a new year group, new cohort, new lessons. So we start bang on. As soon as there's a space in our facility, we start with the next lot. So yeah, game time doesn't really exist for me. And so I am like on my knees, tired.
Yeah.
I'll be like, I'm on the sofa, falling asleep right now.
And if that's the case that you don't have that because that's how the system works, does the school still pile on end of year type tasks that need to be done before September? Or do they recognize the fact that you actually don't have any additional time to do this?
No, because we're almost like front loaded a bit because the new cohort starts in this term. We start doing our September ready tasks like February time because we know the next we're like, and it really freaks everyone out because everyone else, it's almost like being on a different calendar to other people. So it really throws kind of like your equilibrium when everyone else is like, you know, end of year 11 assembly, we're all going to stretch out because you're on a different like time path. And I think it's probably like the same with people who like aren't, you have friends who aren't in education and you try and talk to them about something that's educational calendared, even like next year, end of the year, when I'm talking to people and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that next year. And they're like, what, like January? And I'm like, no, September, next year, September, like like everything messes. You're on this false time thing. And it just shows it for me because like, and then I talk to people in the office and they're on like finance years. So they're like, you can start spending your budget again next year, by which I mean April, after April. Or I'm saying next year when I mean like September, or I'm talking to my friends saying next year and they mean January. And like, you're all on like a different calendar anyway. So I think it's like, it just is slightly different for me. But yeah, game time. So game time, no. Sure. Messing up the calendar because I can't be, correct about which next year I mean when I talk to people about whether I'm talking to my tax man, whether I'm talking to my friend about planning stuff. No, when is next year? Who knows?
When I was in NQT / second, third year, I used to get so jealous of my head of department because he used to be loaded up on GCSE and A-level groups. It'd get to like the end of May. I knew I had a 7-week stint of teaching predominantly Key Stage 3. And he was just free the whole time. it's just like used to great.
I once taught at a school where I taught 14 different classes a week. And I obviously won't say which school. But anyway, I taught 14 classes a week. I think the overwhelming majority, at least 9 of those classes were Key Stage 3, but I also had like 2 sets of, I had 3 Key Stage 4 classes, like year 10 and 11 and 6th form. And the head of our department had a policy where if you were new to teaching, you had to help your NQT mentor and your head of department, well, basically herself, with marking. And the rationale, was they teach like predominantly key stage 4 and 5, but so did I. So like I would do my own marking, do their marking, and then what would basically happen about a week later is Key Stage 3 assessments would begin, and I'd have like 9 sets of my own, like further marking to do.
All coming in the same week. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, your rationale for me helping you was you have more Key Stage 4 classes, even though I taught every year group as well. But then what about when I've got Key Stage 3 marking like a week after? So yeah, I never forgot that.
I bet they threw in a bit of like, it's good for your development.
Yeah,
well.
It was.
It's good for your development as a teacher.
It was for my development. Yeah, that's exactly what it was for. And I've obviously learned so much.
There's two. Those are two of the phrases that I hate most in education are: it's good for your development, because it's used as just an excuse to do anything. Oh, we need you to do an extra break duty, but it'd be really good for your development. There's no one to lead assembly, but if you could do it, it would be great because it's really good for your development. So there's that, or the one where it's like, but think about the kids. Think about the kids. And because, again, those two things are used to cripple teachers more than anything, right? Yep. And generally people just flick between them and just go like, hey, you know, if I need Tom to do something now, right, I'm an assistant head or a deputy head or something, Tom's head of department, and I really need him to do something because like something's gone wrong or we've got to cover. Tom, we've got some year sixes coming in from the local primary. Can you use your PPA to deliver some extra history lessons for them? It'd be really good for your development. And just, you know, we need to think about the kids. And then that would be it. That's literally how some schools I've been in, not all schools, some schools I've been would sell it all the time. Good for you. Think about the kids, Tom. It's good for your development.
Should we talk about some of these things that have been happening? All right. Starting
What's
with
going
the
on?
one. Well, Ray shared this article with me earlier. Have the old school toffs fallen out of love with private schools? Now the flashy set are taking over. I had a chance to read the article. Essentially, let me summarize. This guy is harking back to the old days where he used to pay £5,000 to £7,000 a year to go to school with, in inverted commas, middle class kids. They've now been priced out, and it's now costing on average $22,000 a year to go to the same private school. And obviously the VAT rise, Labour's VAT rise is implemented an average 14% rise on school fees. And I don't know what the stats are yet. I've read that 2 or 3 private schools are going to close or might close.
Yeah. As
a result, but I've not seen. I don't think we're going to have the figures yet, are we? Until September, on what the actual hit's going to be, if you like. See, if Chris Fowles was here now, he's my arch enemy on this, my arch argumentor on this issue, because I have always been, and still am to an extent, in favor of this particular policy, because I just am. In terms of this article, so basically he finishes off by saying, as I write this, I try to picture the scene outside Pembridge Hall School now. All Range Rovers with blacked out windows and mothers dropping off their children wearing dark glasses and baseball caps in their activewear. I think of my mother in her Ford Escort, our dog parked in the back seat, and I feel rather sad. It was a different time. Ray, are you okay?
No.
Wait.
You can't. What I was going to say earlier is that anyone who's watching and not listening, you probably can't tell by my face right now, but I feel so deeply for these people that have been priced out of their private schools that have to watch yummy mummies and their Range Rovers drop off their super rich kids. Sometimes I cry about it at night. I feel so strongly for them. It's so sad.
I mean, I don't understand all of these like little puff pieces and things in the newspaper. Like, I don't care. I don't care that, you know, I don't care. I really don't care. Like, so what? You know, there's something that you can't afford anymore that you could afford before, like, and you were getting on the cheap, and now you're not. You know, who cares? Who cares? Go, you know, literally.
Well, they would argue. I'm sure the counter argument.
What would they argue?
They would argue that, I say they would argue, people would argue, and this is the argument I've heard over and over again, is because of the fee rise, because of the VAT policy, and we did a show on this on Teachers Talk Radio back in, I think it was December or January on this. You can find it on YouTube. And one of the key arguments was that this would mean an exodus from the independent sector into the state sector. Now, Bridget Phillipson responded to that by saying, well, pupil numbers are falling anyway. Numbers on roll generally in most areas are falling anyway. Birth rates and all the rest of it, schools, some schools are closing because they don't even have enough kids in them. That is happening. So her argument is, well, we've got the slack generally in the state sector if that happens. But I said at the time, I'm going to be really surprised if there's this massive shift from the independent sector into the state sector of the kids and families. I will be absolutely shocked if we have a complete mass shutdown of the independent sector.
We won't. And the writer of that article, I think this is what really bothers me about this particular piece. It's not focused on the kids. It's not focused on the system. It's not focused on the real life consequences for millions of young people in this country. It's focused on we can't afford this anymore. These rich people have this thing that we don't have anymore. And it's supposed to be all like nostalgic and supposed to make you feel some sort of empathy for these poor, suffering middle class people. Listen, if I can't have my lattes or my avocado toast, live within your means. No one cares. Literally no one cares. There's not a violin small enough in the world. No one cares. So the system, the concerns about the system, I think those are valid. I agree with it.
Would you apply that though to everybody? No, but so the live within your means thing, would you apply that to everybody?
Everybody in what sense?
At every income level.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So would I. But I was just wondering. Some people don't. So some people don't. Some people would sort of only apply that to people maybe who have a lot more money.
No, and maybe this is some personal bitterness, having been told by older generations for so long that we're so bad with money and that's why we can't afford a house. So there is some bitterness there, but yeah, I honestly, people weren't complaining. Well, people were, but no one was giving them a platform. No one was giving them an article to write about it before, about how expensive the fees used to be before the VAT hike, and complaining that some people couldn't afford it. It was just like, you either can afford it or you can't. Well, guess what? Prices have changed. You either can afford it or you can't. And if you can't, go to school with the plebs. Be like the rest of us.
Yeah. The issue for me, Tom, is that the fact that private school is expensive, right, is not an error in the system or a problem from that. It's by design. It's designed to be expensive, to be exclusionary. It's designed to be expensive to keep people like me out, right? To keep my kids out. That's literally the money there to buy into it is an expense, is a barrier to entry. It's supposed to be expensive. And the reason it's supposed to be expensive is to keep people out, so that it is a privilege, so that it is a luxury, so that it is only for those who can afford it. And so this isn't like a fault. Okay, so there's some people on the line here who are feeling bad because they're no longer part of the in crowd. They're no longer part of the rich set. They're now in with the rest of us. So yeah, sure, they feel bad. But like the bit that they need to question is, what does that say about their opinion of the rest of us? That they think their world is ending, that they have to be like the other 95% of the country. What does that say about them as people and their worldview and their view of children in secondary education, in comprehensive education, that they think that it is a terrible thing to have happened, that their children should have to be educated with our children, with my children, and they think it is terrible. And I think there's two things there. That there's the part that it is, the whole point of it is that it's to exclude everyone. It is to exclude the people who can't afford it. It is to exclude the poor. It is to keep others out. That's the whole point of it. It's exclusionary. And then there is the opinion that it paints. Because if you are going to stand on a pedestal that is the Express or whichever paper this has been pulled from, that wants to kind of turn around and get someone and go, it's terrible, cry for me. My children will now have to be educated with your children. It's a tragedy. That says, I think, a lot more about it than anything. So, like, I have no time for this. Like, and to be honest, if I was putting my hand right out there, I private schools are not a thing for me, full stop. But that's a bigger argument. This kind of thing is divisive. It is money speaking for money, and I'm sick of it. Yeah. I saw one the other day, right, a newspaper article where someone was complaining, and it was a private school parent complaining to say, "Oh, it's terrible. I went to get this education service," and they were saying it was NHS. It wasn't NHS. It was kind of through the NHS. Saying, "I went to get this service for my child," and they said that I couldn't because I was a private school student. So that's really unfair because we're so put upon. When you dug into it, it's because the local authority was paying for this service for all children in comprehensive education, in local authority education. So they'd bought into a service in the NHS. And because this parent had opted out of local authority education into private education, they weren't part of that kind of collective agreement. It hadn't been paid for them. And they were still complaining that they wanted more, and they wanted it free, and they wanted it paid for. And, I think there's a mindset there that I disagree with. I'm sure some people are doing it because, they think it's what's good for their kid, right? They think it's going to help their kid in life. But then you're answering your own question. You are buying something that other people are not allowed.
Because they feel entitled to it, and they feel entitled, and then suddenly it's out of their price range, and they're so used to feeling entitled to that thing, they still feel like they have a right to it, and they get angry. And I don't understand how anyone could read something like this and care.
Yeah, we don't care, Tom. We don't care.
All right, I think I got the message, guys.
We don't care.
It's the most exercised I've seen Nathan for about a year.
I went to school. Honest to God, I went to school today. I've got cardboard in my school shoes at the moment because I've got a hole in the bottom and I want to get to the end of term. So I got cardboard in the bottom of my shoe. And you want me to care that someone can't, they're making a choice between their Range Rover and their private school. I don't care. Some of us have got other problems. I'm deciding whether or not I can buy a pair of shoes this year.
Well,
can I tell you something? Can I admit to something? Can I confess to a really deep irony here that is not escaping me, because some of my friends will watch this and they will call me out on it if I don't. I am currently wearing my house shirt from my private school that I went to.
That is outstanding. That is outstanding, Ray.
What a plot
Pulling
twist.
up the ladder. Pulling up the ladder.
That's brilliant. Well done. Well done. Yeah, it's that sort of champagne socialism speech, Ray, that we get. I live for. I live for it. I live for it. Right, guys. Well,
need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
moving on, we have another story. Teacher discovers 9,000 WhatsApp messages from Year 6 pupils in one night. Simon, a head teacher who also writes a blog called South Gloss Head, detailed how teachers at both schools concluded that smartphones were not beneficial for primary age children. Here's what happened. Mr. Botten explained that when a student failed to retrieve their mobile after class, leaving it in the teacher's cupboard overnight, the teacher picked up the phone, waking it, only to see a notification of 9,000 missed messages from the Year 6 pupil WhatsApp group overnight. 9,000 messages in a 15-hour overnight period, Mr. Botton said. At first it was, so reflecting on his 20 years in this school, he's watched the technological phenomenon unfold slowly. At first it was imperceptible. The odd argument via old-fashioned text, the odd child seeing something online which they shouldn't have. But over the years, I've seen the risks grow ever more significant and more frequent. Increase in cyberbullying through WhatsApp, young students exchanging unsuitable images, children becoming increasingly immersed in virtual worlds, etc. I mean, listen, I've moved way past kids just being anywhere near phones in schools. I moved past that probably about 5 years ago.
I think the question here really is like, actually, how many times, take away the phone, how many like points of conversation would a Year 6 child say anyway? I got a Year 3 child I live with. He probably says yeet 9,000 times in an evening, like easily, easily. So like 9,000 messages, I don't know. Like it might seem a lot, but like
it's a lot. What?
It's a lot, Nathan. It's a lot.
What are you on about? It seems like a lot. It is a lot.
20 people, if there's 20 people in that group, and like literally everyone's going like, huh, yeah, funny, huh, funny,
yeah,
what,
like emojis,
funny,
yeah.
WTF,
what,
yeah, who, are you up, like it quickly gets out of hand. I agree.
Sounds like Yasmin's Monday night that with her work colleagues.
It does. Sounds so familiar.
Like 2 hours sleep a night.
This is what happens if I turn off my DTR updates for a day.
Yeah.
Tell me how many messages. Let me just check.
It won't be 9,000. Come off it.
Okay, how many emails? Like say I was off sick for a day, right? A couple of weeks ago, I was off sick for a day. Like I hurt my back, so I was off sick, and I didn't turn my computer on because I was, I took a bunch of painkillers and I was out cold. But I went into work the next day, right? I had a whole ton of emails, right? Now, are you telling me that the head teacher, and I think I follow this guy on Twitter maybe or something, I recognize the name, right? And I'm pretty sure he's a pretty sound guy, and like I like him. But this is a head teacher.
I knew you'd caveat it.
How many emails?
Go on.
How many emails does he have in a morning? Because I know plenty of teachers who would have like a whole ton of emails.
But that's a professional head teacher. Why are we comparing it to a Year 6 kid?
They shouldn't. I don't think they should be on their phone that much. Like my comment with the article was, what the heck are parents doing? Yeah. That their kid is on the phone that much at what time? That has to be going on late. Like why? And 9,000 is a lot.
I'm going to start sending messages now to the group chat. See how many I can get up to by the end of the day.
No, don't
go for it.
Can get to 9,000.
Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's. I think we've arrived at a consensus that pretty much. I don't understand why there's a debate over mobile phone use. Although, I did read an article about from the minister in Estonia, the main education minister in Estonia. She was saying mobile phones are great, and they actually use them a lot for learning. This is like the chief minister for education in Estonia. So she had some positive things to say. Do you want to hear what she said? I know.
I think
you don't often hear a
schools. I just feel like everyone needs to get over. Like, I feel like part of this. I was just going to say a similar thing, Tom. Like, I feel like part of the issue with why mobile phones are so used so poorly by children is because everyone is still stuck arguing on whether kids should even have phones in the first place. And it's I think there's more reasons not to have a phone than there is to have one for a child. But realistically, most of them do. Parents have all kinds of different motivations for why they give their children phones. And it's just a part of society now. Like most adults who advocate for children not having phones have phones themselves. And I understand, you know, adults and children aren't the same, but I feel like part of why children have such unhealthy mobile phone use is because there isn't really a discussion about how to use it properly or what's actually healthy. It's kind of stuck in this loop of you shouldn't have a phone in the first place. Like a couple of months ago, I was watching this school swap where kids in South London went to a school in America. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me was in the American classrooms, the children were allowed their phones on the table in lessons. And obviously the British kids that went over there were also allowed their phones in the classroom, and they just couldn't get them off them. So like even at lunchtime, they wouldn't want to go to the playground and socialize like the American kids did. They'd all be sat together somewhere in a corner indoors just on their phones, and the teachers had to like intervene. And part of why I guess the phones were the kids in America, and I know that's just like a really like rubbish example, but part of why my perception that the kids in America weren't as addicted to their phones was because it was just accepted that phones are a part of their life. And I just feel like when something is kind of forbidden or controversial, it actually makes kids worse.
Yeah.
Like, whereas if the conversation changed from you are allowed a phone, but you know, this is what you can use it for, and this is when you can use it. I don't know. Like, I just feel like if it things would get better, but a lot of people are still stuck on this. Well, children shouldn't have phones anyway, and children know that. And then they have a phone, and then suddenly it's like, well, what else can I get away with?
This is what Kala said. Kala said there were no mobile phone bans in schools in Estonia. On the contrary, a smartphone is seen as part and parcel of Estonia's highly successful digital education policy. I've not heard of any problems. The schools established the rules. We use mobile phones for learning purposes. We have local elections. In local elections, 16-year-olds can vote, and they can vote online using their mobile phones. So we want them to use mobile phones to do their civic duty, to get information and to analyze political platforms. It's a little bit strange if we would not allow them to use them in school in an educational setting. That would be a very confusing message to send a 16-year-old. Vote online, vote on a mobile, but don't use ChatGPT on your phone to do educational learning. We are not banning, we're giving guidelines, especially regarding younger children, younger than 12. There you go.
Yeah, I agree with her. I agree with Yasmin. I think, make phones boring, right?
Yeah.
Make it boring, make it normal, make them turn up their nose at it, and it sounds like that's the Estonian way. The phones aren't there because they're, illicit. They're only cool kids have a phone. Only that kid who, like the naughtiest kids have them and show them off and all of this stuff. No, like everyone's got one. They're doing homework on them. It's boring. And then actually maybe some of that will go away. If you truly want to do it, normalize it, make it boring, make it average, and the kids will
I don't know if I agree with that, though, because I feel like in a lot of the schools I've worked in where they've banned them, if you reverse that ban, I don't think that would happen. I think you'd end up with just long-term loss of learning, because I just think the kids would be on and playing games the whole time.
I think short-term loss of learning, yes, but over time, it would. I feel like, and that would be because it was something that previously wasn't allowed. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think over time, it wouldn't be as important. But I don't know, there's just something about the British school system, because there's such a variation in phone policies, and the average child will have friends in different schools, and there are vastly different policies. And so until everything is kind of the same, I think short term that would cause massive problems. Even when I had school on a day where, say on a Saturday where we had intervention, the bane of my existence were mobile phones, because Monday to Friday you weren't allowed them in school. You handed them in at registration, and now on a Saturday I'm spending about half an hour asking you to take out your AirPods, and it just was annoying, you know? So I think I see what you're saying, Tom, but I just think in the long term, if you make it boring, it's not going to be as important. But then the question is, how do you make it boring?
Yeah, I think culturally,
especially with the increase in addictive apps. Yeah.
And like the monitoring of it in lessons as well. Because if a kid's on their phone, they think they're subtle, they're obvious. It's just a matter of whether or not I have the energy to, how I'm going to deal with that. But if everyone's allowed to have a phone out, how do I know which kids are using it for studying, which kids are doing the work on it, and which kids are texting their friend, and which kids are playing a game, and which kids are, do you know what I mean? So that there's logistical, practical issues as well.
Yeah.
And I think some of that's cultural. There actually are places where, and I think if you were to do it in some schools, it would be different to others. But I think if there was a strong culture, and it sounds like this is maybe what the Estonian kind of thing is suggesting, is that you could have your phones there, they might get a text message, and they would not answer it because it's not culturally maybe seen as the thing to. It's not the expected behavior that you would do. You can ignore a text message. All of those things are I really remember I can't remember what country it is. It's somewhere like Sweden or Finland or somewhere, and they tried to introduce first class travel, right, on trains, and it just didn't take off because no one wanted to do first class. It was very egalitarian. They didn't want to do it because culturally people didn't do that. I think that part of it is where it all falls down. If a phone goes off, I guarantee, and this is probably adults as well, if someone's phone went off and you were talking to them, they would find it really hard not to look at it. And that I don't think is technology alone. I think some of that is society, and
have you ever watched that? Has anyone watched that documentary called The Social Dilemma? Where the founders or the makers, designers, whatever, of different social media apps talk about the things that they've implemented that are designed to work against your brain and be addictive. So even Twitter, or at least when it was called Twitter, the sound it makes when you scroll so that you constantly want to refresh your timeline and things like that were deliberate because it kept people coming back for more. So don't really know why I brought that up, but what you said just reminded me.
But that's an important point, right? Because what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but for a lot of kids, intrinsically, phones are quite addictive.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends the level with which you think kids can adapt to sort of norms and stuff. I mean, a lot of kids, not a lot, but a lot, will just do whatever in the moment they want to do. It's like, oh, there's a phone there, I can just play on the phone. So I don't think they're going to think, oh, hey, it's not cool anymore to sit here and drool while I'm playing on a phone, so I'm not going to do it anymore. I think they're just going to do it because it's the easier option to do it.
I just think
try and learn something in a classroom. There's a phone there. I can text someone on it under the desk. I'm not blaming the kids for that, by the way, because when I was a kid, I'm sure if I remember I used to occasionally I'd try and listen to music in lessons and stuff by going like that, a headphone up my blazer thing. I mean, I remember listening to a whole test match. I'm serious. I listened to a whole test match, ball by ball commentary on BBC Radio 4 long wave on a Thursday and Friday for the whole day, like that, right? Now, to be fair, all I'm saying is kids will always look for the way out. It's just that this particular way out is way more, I guess, addictive and dangerous than maybe something else because of what you can access on a phone almost instantly.
Yeah.
And that's And that's where parents come in as well. I take that point in that parents could put all sorts of safeguardings on the phone and stuff like that. And they could say, listen, if you're found to do this with the phone or do that with the phone, then we'll take it off you, right? Blah, 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 blah. But let's be honest. It's probably not going to happen in many cases. So therefore, the only other option is you got a lot of trust, guys. I don't have as much trust.
Oh, I have no trust at all. I have absolutely. I think all of this sounds wonderful.
I felt like you were going to say that, Ray. I
wonderful
feel like
in theory.
It's me and you versus Yasmin and Nathan on this.
No, I'm saying I have more issue with the apps than I do with the phones.
Yeah.
Right, and I think there needs to be a distinction there. Right, I have more issue with the apps than I do with the phones.
Okay, because but that's suggesting that. No, but are you saying you've got more issue with smartphones than like brick phones, like Nokia 402s?
No. Well, somewhat, but no. If you had phones, if we actually enforced the age limits on apps, I think things would be different, right? I think actually, if there was a system there that actually worked, I think that we would be having a different conversation. I think it would take time to work through, but I think we would be having a different conversation because I think some of the addictive nature of smartphones is driven through, like Yasmin said, the way apps and things do it. Because, okay, so there are messages, right? But, if we truly cared about, how damaging this was, rather than just banning them, there are things we could enforce on phones. We could say, actually, do you know what? No phone is allowed to give out notification messages, right? You could say that feasibly, technologically, it's possible, right? You can say, actually, do you know what? Phones in the UK are not allowed notifications until you're over 18, which means suddenly notifications go off. You check it when you check it, right? And then you see if you've got messages. And the same with the app. You enforce those properly so that they weren't as addictive, if they weren't as, things. TikTok, the kids in school shouldn't be having that anyway. What's the age limit on Snapchat? Most of the kids in school shouldn't be having that anyway. So some of the things that we have issues with are not the phone itself, but the things the phone is doing through apps. And I think there's a real distinction there between, is the phone bad? Is internet bad? Is these other things? And I think because it gets very mixed very quickly, I think it's a different thing.
This show, everybody, is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Visit johncattbookshop.com. Go on, get yourself a book to read in that gain time period you have. There's all sorts of stuff on there, educational research, evidence-informed practice, subject-specific stuff. Even though this word has been tarnished, there is some really good books on well-being on the John Catt Bookshop website. Don't let the tarnishing of the word well-being put you off, because there's some good stuff on there. Visit John Catt Education, johncattbookshop.com. Thank you for sponsoring us, John Catt, as always. So, Yasmin, let's move on from mobile phones and let's move on to the exclusion show with Yasmin Omar. Yasmin, you have...
I've been waiting for this moment my whole life. But anyway, remind me what the article
Well, you wanted us to talk about it. You said...
I did.
So
let me just get it up.
I mean, I can remind you of it, probably.
Sorry, guys, it's been a long day. Yeah, so it was Labour to force academies to take thousands of violent and disruptive pupils permanently excluded from other schools. And I support that. But with context.
What's the first paragraph saying?
I think that this headline is just hysterical for no reason. But anyway, it says ministers are pushing through new laws to fast-track the admission of violent and disruptive pupils into academy schools. In the latest attempt by Labour to clip the wings of academies, which are designed to be free of local authority control, schools would be directed by councils to take thousands of pupils permanently excluded for physical violence or threatening to use an offensive weapon.
Okay.
I think it's so hysterical because I'll be so honest, local authorities already do that. Every local authority has some sort of fair access procedure where children that have been permanently excluded who go on to behave or, I don't know, demonstrate remorse or, you know, adjust well in an alternative provision, do every month get the opportunity to go back to a mainstream school. And these schools often don't get a say in it. The local authority will like look at the number of kids they have on roll. They'll look at if they've got any spaces, like say this is a kid in year 8, if that school is undersubscribed for year 8, and also, you know, have a lot of exclusions, which typically academies are often accused of by local authorities. They will often, like, there will be like a proposal for them to take on this child. And yes, they are technically allowed to decline, but they have to have really good reason. And honestly, most of the time they don't get away with declining. And if they do that month, and for whatever reason have a good reason, like say maybe the kid they've been asked to take on is considered a safeguarding risk because they've got known issues with children already on roll at that new mainstream, then, you know, the school might get away with saying no. But then the following month, when everyone's back in this fair access meeting, I've seen local authorities bring up, hey, you said no to so-and-so last month, so here's 2 in year 10, you know, so this does already exist. And I'll share why I support it. Okay, and obviously we'll caveat with saying, I think this title is hysterical. Like, I don't necessarily support this title, but I do generally support the concepts, but obviously not 100%, right? The first thing I'll say is, not every single child that's excluded is excluded for violence and disruption, for starters. Secondly, I think it's good for things like off-rolling. I think a lot of kids just disappear from mainstream schools. I've seen it, and obviously I know I'm a very small part of a whole country of school kids in terms of the experiences or the children that I've worked with and things that I know, but like there are a lot of kids that don't have an exclusion on record who have ended up in an alternative provision, but often it's because they've had an incident or whatever, and the parents have been told, you know, you can take your child out of the school now to save an exclusion on their record, and this child is now suddenly, you know, missing from education. Tom's just looking at me like, just shut up. But anyway.
Had a long day, Yasmin, and you're saying a lot of things I disagree with. I'm waiting patiently for you to finish.
I've suddenly come to life. You know how much I love talking about.
Continue. I will wait, and I've had a long day, but I disagree with every word you've said so far, but I'm enjoying it. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Well, look, there's so much I could say. Like, there's so much I could say. Like, I'm struggling to even know, like, where I'm going to go with this, like, to piss you off. But, like, I can think of at least 10 different ways I can upset you right now. But anyway, like, where I just kind of wanted to start is why I feel like this article is hysterical is not every child is excluded for violence and disruption. There are loads of children that are permanently excluded for one-off incidents that have nothing to do with disruption or violence. And also, even though the most common reason for being excluded is definitely persistent disruption, I think everyone knows that. And number 2, I've said it already. I've lost my train of thought. What was the other thing that I said? Schools already do, like, academies are often forced, not just academies, but all schools in a particular local authority. But there is definitely really huge variation across local authorities. Like, I'm in London, and the borough I live in and the adjacent borough have really different procedures. I was a safeguarding lead in a pupil referral unit in the adjacent borough, and they had really, really good procedures. And we had kids who moved to the borough I live in, and the process was just completely different, and kids would just kind of get ignored, or like it wasn't as robust a procedure. So this does definitely happen. And I don't think enough people know that. Like, kids who've been permanently excluded do go back to mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously not all of them. There are definitely kids I've met who I wouldn't recommend for returning to mainstream. And I don't say that lightly. Like, there are some kids who are genuinely not suited to a mainstream setting because of things they've done or things they've even continued to do. or because of, a level of criminality, or a criminal record that they've now got that is actually a risk to a school community. And obviously, as a teacher and, someone who cares about schools, I would say as well, and I've said this loads of times, like, I do support exclusions. Like, I don't think permanent exclusions should get taken away. I don't think I'd ever be someone who says or believes in zero exclusions, because I know firsthand and secondhand the impact poor behavior can have on a school. And I don't want schools and their procedures and policies to be undermined. I really don't. I want a school's policies and what they've chosen for themselves to be respected and upheld, and for everyone to be safe. And I just think, given the risk, I think in the case that a child, look, I think it matters what you got excluded for is really important context. Your prior behavior record is really important context, and your behavior record and just general conduct inside and outside of school post exclusion is also really important as to whether or not you should return to mainstream. There are kids I've supported going back to mainstream, and they've done really well in a new school with like a renewed chance. And there are some kids who have also returned to mainstream and have, it's been a car crash and they've ended right back at the Peru. And then there are also some kids who, a head teacher or a senior leadership team wouldn't ever recommend for returning to mainstream. And it is probably the right decision. Some children do need to be in specialist provisions, but I just don't think in every single child's life or circumstance you should just be condemned to like whatever your exclusion was for. Like, context changes my view on this entirely, and I will stop rambling now.
Rae, any thoughts?
I mean, it's the Daily Mail, so obviously the headline is going to be sensationalist and ridiculous.
Oh.
Yeah.
And students who've been permanently excluded it's not like they disappear into the ether. Like, where do these kids go? Well, often they end up back in mainstream schools. So this is actually not completely new, but again, look at the source. So yeah, I don't actually think it's that big of a deal in terms of news. But yeah, although everything you said, Yasmin, sounds completely rational and reasonable and believable, because you make things sound rational and reasonable and believable. But I know that I wish some of the kids I've seen do some of the things that they've done. I wish they'd been excluded and they hadn't. I'm kind of at the end of my tether with chances. So I'm coming at this from a different angle.
Fair enough. No, honestly, and that's fair enough. That is fair enough. And again, like, when I feel like a teacher has been persistently let down by repeated behavior incidents that they've taken the time to report, like, I often see that as a leadership failure, because, like, again, for me, it often goes back to, and like, I don't want to sound like I'm being overly critical of like schools and then just really excusing kids who've like done stuff that have got them permanently excluded. But like, I've been a union rep. I'm friends with, I'd say my biggest friendship group, or the most of the people I'm friends with or good friends with, are teachers. And often I've worked with them in different schools, and I've seen, teachers be treated completely differently when it comes to behavior. And how sometimes schools have systems which are there to support, teachers, but it's just used as a cursory assessment of your perceived abilities to manage behavior, and actually ends up negatively impacting the teacher more than it does the child, which then in turn emboldens that child, because they feel like it's kind of being co-signed by people who know what they're doing. And it just ends up being like this vicious cycle. But like, for me,
what was the thing you said earlier about the risk thing? I didn't get that.
I said a lot of things. Oh, the risk. So look, I know that a lot of people hate hearing about, permanent exclusion to prison pipeline. And I actually think hatred for it is in many ways justified. But what I will say is, what a lot of people fail to realize about crime is children who go on to commit crimes, and again, like, you can't apply everything to everyone, but a lot of children who go on to commit crimes actually end up victims of crime first. And my belief is you're way more likely to become a victim of crime after a permanent exclusion. Like, if you compare mainstream and alternative provision, you're just way more likely, because where you go when you're excluded, where you get sent to post exclusion is based on your postcode and not where your school was. It's based on the local authority where your home postcode is. That's often really far away. PRU hours are a lot shorter. Often, they finish school earlier. There are a lot of children who don't attend, or their attendance plummets, or have far longer journeys than they used to have before. You've also now put every single kid who's been permanently excluded in the same place, which actually makes some children way more at risk than others, or just a lot more vulnerable and susceptible to things. Like, if you want personal examples, I've worked at a school where, like, a pupil referral unit, where a member of staff, a kid has said that a member of staff, to bribe them, left cannabis for them under a disused car. Basically said, just behave at school, and like, you can get some, like, I've just put some weed for you under so and so car with so and so number plate. And the kid has come to tell me, we've had staff there.
What do you mean by, just to come back to my original point, what do you mean about the risk? Are you talking about the risk to the child who's being moved from one school after they've been excluded to another school?
Well, yeah, I'm saying that they're way more likely to have lower attendance. Where are they when their attendance is lower? The people they're exposed to are typically a lot more dangerous. There's a vast difference in the staff, and this, I don't mean this offensively. Like, I know there are loads of incredible staff members in alternative provision, but there are also there's just, in my experience anyway, just a huge difference between the staff in mainstream and the staff in alternative provision, and even the kind of external visitors you get. I remember having this external visitor come visit us. It was a group of them, and they had all done life sentences for murder. And like, I struggled to sleep after I heard their stories. And I just remember thinking, imagine someone half my age listening to this. Like, when you're in mainstream, if you're struggling to read, like, they don't invite someone who can't read at all to come and do an assembly for you as some sort of like inspo for what you shouldn't, or what you should avoid. Like, when you're, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like people often don't know how much more risk you face when you're in a pupil referral unit. And fair enough.
Coming back, Yasmin, coming back to what you're saying, the bit I was sort of, for the last 10 minutes, I've been listening. And what I was waiting for the whole time was for you to say, oh, sorry, I wasn't talking about the risk to the child who's already been excluded. I thought you were going to say, let's talk about the risk to the 2,000 children that we're now going to put them in within another school. That's what I thought you were going to. I thought you were going to start talking about the risk to the vast majority of kids who never, ever engage in anything at even a level where they could be excluded. That's what I thought you were going to say.
Tom, can I just come in? Because I think there's there's a little bit of a gap. There's a little bit of a gap between what we're talking about, because a permanent exclusion is not an exclusion from mainstream education. Yeah. A permanent exclusion is an exclusion from one school, right? And in England, you have 6 days until you're in full education again. And that's why you often hear like this thing about, particularly with pupil referral units, where they talk about day 6 provision, which is if a child is going to extend past those 6 days, hasn't been able to get into another mainstream school, right? But the model as it stands, which is where this is maybe less of a story. This is, what if they wanted this story to be scary, and I think it's important that we note this is written by a political editor, not an educational reporter. This is written by a political editor for the Daily Mail. The same one who was in trouble for making comments about the deputy leader of the opposition's legs crossing in. This is not real educational journalism.
Is it? No.
That's who wrote this article, right? But what happens currently, or what should be happening, is you are permanently excluded if you have been found to breach in a substantial way a school's rules, regulations, or safety, right? You go to another mainstream school. That's the model. This is not new. This is not news. That is what happens. And, if it's bad enough, the local authority might suggest that a pupil referral unit place is better suited for you.
Yeah,
but
I know that.
You should be going to a mainstream school. So all this is saying is that academies can't shirk that responsibility that every other school has to take.
I don't disagree with that. The bit that irks me is not that. The process and the system has to be fair for everybody. If that's what the process and system is. The bit that irks me sometimes is our focus on sort of, when we think about things that have happened in a school, and yes, there's going to be exceptions. There's always exceptions in life. There's always exceptions in anything, right? But let's just talk about the vast majority of cases. There's going to be sort of, for want of a better word, there's going to be within that school victims, whether that be a victim of someone who's been assaulted, or the bit that hardly ever gets talked about, the bit of children's learning being literally ruined over 5 years, potentially, by one kid, not by 10, by one kid, right? Over 5 years, it happens, and it still happens all the time. So the bit that irks me a little bit is our focus on those kids and families ahead of everybody else. And listen, someone's going to say, well, and I get it. Some kids have had traumatic upbringings. Some kids have been dealt a bad hand. Some kids have particular difficulties with learning. There's lots of different things we can say. And again, we can talk all day about different situations, contexts, exceptions. But as a general rule, we invest so much of our conversation about the risks to the people who've already done something that has already led to victims, already led to people's learning and school lives being literally destroyed. And we invest more and more and more and more time, money, effort, conversation into those kids, and not completely, but in many cases, we pay lip service to all the others. Oh yeah, of course I care about all the others. Yeah, but let's get back to these kids. Let's get back to this kid. How are we going to make sure this kid? And I get it. I get it. All kids matter. I'm not saying we should dismiss anybody, but what I'm saying is there's a big group of kids, in my opinion, that just hardly ever get talked about. Why do we hardly ever talk about? I'm not even talking about the good kids. I'm talking about the middle kids, the kids who just sort of, I got a warning, 1 week, I got a detention, 2 weeks ago, but I never do anything. We literally just a massive block of kids we don't talk about them. We don't talk about them. That's it. That's my frustration. The system of, if a kid gets excluded and another school is almost forced to take them as part of some wider process or system, I don't really care. I think if you've got to have a system, there has to be some sort of system. So I've got no opinion on whether a school should take that kid or not. The bit that I have an opinion on is the investment of sort of the way we are as a society now to invest so much time, money, energy, goodwill, when it is so difficult now for a kid to work their way through particular levels in schools. I understand your point, Yasmin. There'll be the odd one who that doesn't happen to, but we know as teachers, we know in all the schools I've worked in, I know there's others out there that have been more rogue in the past. Of course, of course that's happened. No one can deny that. But I think now in particular, and certainly more recently in the last 5 years maybe, and even before that, most schools, you have to go through a very, very long, rigorous process to exclude a child. Unless they've done something that's like a one-off incident that's literally like you're getting excluded because that's just gone way beyond the threshold. But when we're talking about disruption, they have to have disrupted probably about 1,000 lessons before there's even a conversation about exclusion. That's my point. The thresholds are pretty damn high, right, for that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but what I am saying is once you've got to that point, right, it's just tough because there's a lot of teachers there who are helpless within this. And we're not talking about all those kids they're teaching, and what happens to them, what happens to the teachers, what happens to the TAs, what happens to the school leader who's in that situation. And how many, I don't know. I don't understand this sort of complete free pass mentality. It's a free pass mentality. We're just going to keep giving free passes. We're going to keep looking for reasons. We're going to keep looking for excuses. We're going to keep all the way through. I don't know. You tell me I'm wrong.
You know what,
No, that's
Tom?
my life.
Yeah, I will say, look, I genuinely understand what you're saying, and I think there is so much validity to what you're saying there. And even there, listening to what you said, I don't think any kind of bad behavior is excusable. Like, I don't think having SEND or a traumatic background necessarily makes you bad in any way. Like, yes, it's additional hurdles that you face that can in many ways be managed with the right support, etc. But I think it's just how I see it. It's not putting these children who've made really poor decisions over the rest of them. That's not how I see it. I think how I see it in the current system that we have is they actually, I just feel like a lot of, so many different statistics show, what happens to a child post permanent exclusion. And that's not to say that they didn't earn it. That's not to say that a school didn't exhaust everything that they could do to support them, or, didn't follow a robust procedure. But so for me, I just think, just to finish my point, Tom, whenever someone says that to me, and I do hear this all the time, and honestly, I genuinely feel like the validity in what you're saying, and it's a big part of why I support exclusions. And I'll never say, I don't see myself ever having a zero tolerance or being completely against permanent exclusions. But how I like to think of it is, do we actually see all children as equal, or do we put them on a sliding scale based on their behavioral choices? Because what I hear there is, because of something you've done at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever, you are now condemned to a life where you're now more at risk of crime, being either a victim or a perpetrator, or you're condemned to having about 40% lower attendance than you probably had before. The average attendance in a pupil. No, but I just
no. Hang on, let me just make the point. It's okay, but it's not about being condemned. It's about choices and consequences. Every choice you make will have a consequence. Okay,
but it's fluid. So they had the consequence.
You can call the consequences condemnation, but they're just consequences. If I do something really, really bad out there on the street right now, and I go to prison, then my life's potentially ruined. But that's a consequence.
But prisoners get released. To me, do you know what I mean? So
been excluded. We're not suggesting
so my point is
excluded. You can't rebuild your life.
Exactly. But that's my view. What I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying the consequences of the condemnation. What I'm saying is that how the system we currently have, the reason why I have the view that I currently do on excluded children is because of the system that currently exists post exclusion. Now, if that was to improve, where, I don't know, children were able to have better options, where the quality of, you know, alternative provision and all of those things were to improve, then I'd probably be more in favor of, you know, children who are permanently excluded remaining separated from the children who are in mainstream. But my opinion is based on the system as it currently stands, and that's where I see the condemnation. I just don't feel like it's a good enough system. And so for me, I see my view as, I see all children as completely equal, and that doesn't mean having, you know what I find so ironic, Tom? I see it as you not seeing all children equally, but I also feel I feel no type of way, because I get why you have the view of me that I do. I get it, but
it's not a view.
I just think of my opinion. I know, but just for me, I just think the way the system is currently set up, children are, you know, put on a sliding scale based on their behavioral choices, and that's what I've got an issue with, you know. And for me, like I said, you know, if the system was to improve, I said not every child is excluded for violence or disruption, you know. And you know, I really like what Nathan explained there about, you know, the 6-day provision. But I think for me, if the quality of education and the quality of opportunity and life chances post a permanent exclusion were far better in, you know, in England, I would be more support of, you know, the way that the system is now. Do you see what I'm saying? Like I would then move my focus more onto everything else. But I just think there's just a huge gulf between the children in mainstream and the children that are excluded. And I'm not taking away from the fact that excluded children will have done something to get excluded. I just think that if you did something at 12, like, you shouldn't have the life chances and opportunities that you do at like 18, because of what you did.
I don't necessarily sort of go along with, even after a child's excluded from one school for the first time, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that that's it in terms of opportunities to turn things around. That's it in terms of opportunities in general. And, you know, it's all terrible, and we that's it. We wash our hands and they're out, sort of thing. I don't buy into that. I think there are opportunities. I'm not saying they're as good as the opportunities that the kids who are still in the mainstream.
And that's exactly it.
Well, yeah, because there's if you've disrupted 5,000 lessons and someone's asked you to stop over a period of 2 years, many times, to stop doing things, and you continue to do the same thing again and again, and you continue to escalate up a ladder towards exclusion, and you have all these opportunities to stop, then you keep going through that. And I understand they're young people, I get that, but you keep going through, and then you're excluded. I'm not saying that you should be cast off to have nothing, but what I am saying is the guys who've stayed there, Ray's gone, she can't take anymore.
No, she's just gone to get a child.
So I'm making the point, and Nathan, you can come in on this. All I'm saying is, yes, probably as a society, the opportunities, the money, the buildings, the staff, all of that stuff.
Oh, Tom,
I'm saying, why should it be? Why should that be more than that? Or
Tom, but I didn't say it should be more. Yeah,
right.
I didn't say it should be more.
It's not equal, and here is where the whole thing mismatches. Okay, because when a student is, you know, put into an alternative provision or whatever, the funding level that goes to significantly increases, right? Now, you can have the kid in mainstream, you can have this student in mainstream where they are getting funding at a mainstream level to support them. And for most students, right, if you ignore any additional ALN or SCN funding that you might be allocated, if you ignore any pupil premium or free school meal funding that you might be allocated, they are going to get a set amount, which is what currently in England around $4,000 a student, $5,000 a student in a mainstream secondary, right? Around that. Okay. Funding in a pupil referral unit is probably 4 or 5 times that amount, right? Per student. Okay.
Yeah, because it's
so the access, the access there to funding, to support exists. Whether or not we action on that, and this is not to have a dig at anyone working in alternative provision. I work in alternative provision. What I don't think we do very well is think about it effectively and getting children back on track. Funding exists, right, to do this job. Whether we are using that funding well or not, right, but the funding exists. And the sad state of affairs for me in a lot of places, and actually this isn't the way it works in Swansea. Swansea has chosen to go a slightly different way with the way their funding works, where I am. But a school could do with some of that funding, right? Now, if I said to you, there is a student struggling in your school, we think might reach permanent exclusion, but we are going to claw back some of that funding from the pool referral unit or from the local authority or wherever that is going to go to. We are going to pull in some of that support to help them stay in mainstream, to prevent, not to put people off from permanently being excluded, but to prevent the incidents happening that might cause permanent exclusion. And I think there's an opportunity there. The problem is the system is flawed, and the way the system works is flawed. And that means that we end up with these debates that don't logically make sense, because we are not arguing over what's best for the student. We're not arguing what's best for the community of the school. And both of those things are sometimes individual versus collective, are at odds with each other, right? Sometimes it's a question of money. Sometimes it's a question of support. And those things don't exist, right?
Well, I just think I'm just not a very nice person, because I looked at the building at the end of my road when I lived in Manchester, and I looked at the building that I went to teach in, which was a special school, not an AP, a special school, right? And the building at the end of my road was an AP. I found it. I drove past it every day. I found it really tough. Because, listen, this makes me a bad person. Probably it really does. It genuinely does, and that's fine. But you've got eight table tennis tables outdoors. You've got, seriously, I'm not joking, 8 table tennis tables, 1 tennis court, a huge yard, and what must have been a building that was 10 times more modern than the building that I was going into in the special school, for class sizes of maybe 1, 2. I mean, I never saw, I lived there, and, it was obviously a small cohort of kids in there, right? Sort of shouting at again, it makes me a bad person, but shouting at passers-by and sort of all the rest of it, right? I'm just saying that happens. I'm not blaming. I'm not saying that's just part and parcel. I get it, but it's tough. Because I'm saying, okay, money, you're saying money, it's community, it's whatever we support. But sometimes you have to make choices with money. Because there's a limited amount of money.
Tom, I get that. Can I just say? Can I just say, when I left a mainstream and I went to Peru, just to agree with you, I actually used to go on trips like 3 times a week in a pupil referral unit. I went trampolining every Wednesday. I went swimming every Tuesday. I'd never been on a single trip in mainstream. I had the time of my life. And I used to always say...
When I worked in an AP in 2016, I went to the gym. They went to the gym every day. It was
I used to say to the other SLT, like there is, and it's literally what Nathan was just explaining as well, I always used to say, if I was excluded and I was here, or if I hadn't been excluded already, I would want to, because there's literally no incentive to like behave in any mainstream in that borough, because you're going to have a way like better time than, in some sense, you did in mainstream. And like that, I don't deny that, Tom. I don't deny that. Like, I see where your sentiment comes from. I genuinely do. And, when I was on these trips, I did often think like, just, to give another really quick example, there was a kid who basically made like a sexual harassment type comment towards me at school in the middle of a lesson one day in the pupil referral unit. And at the end of every single term, we had these reward trips for children who basically had, behaved or met whatever the threshold was for good behavior. And on the day, it was actually the next day, no, 2 days later, that we were meant to go on this trip, and I was the lead, like SLT, on the trip. And what had basically happened was one of the kids who was meant to be on the trip couldn't come to the trip because he was in court for possession of a knife. This is a rewards trip for good behavior at school. And so to not put the money that had gone towards the trip to waste, someone basically said, another member of SLT said, well, we're going to put that kid on. And there was a member of staff on my behalf, a guy who worked in the school, who was like, like what this student said to Yasmin, like about 48 hours ago, to then put him on a rewards trip with the same teacher that he made this comment towards. Is that a good idea? And in the end, the decision was, yes, he's going to go on the trip. And this member of staff basically refused to come and was like, I'm not going to go then, because this just makes a mockery of, behavior and, systems and the school and, our culture, etc., and refused to come. And obviously, as the lead SLT, I still had to go. But, like, again, Tom, like there is so much that you say that I agree with. And Nathan put it really well by saying, this debate about exclusions and, excluded children often comes across as illogical, because the argument is like, A, there's so much variation everywhere. And B, it comes, a lot of it is down to money and, what's done with that money. And I just see that there are so many sides to this argument where people are right, even though what they're saying is completely different, or the children they're defending is completely different.
The thing that I think as well, Tom, that often doesn't get factored in here is age. When we talk about, often personal responsibility and what that means, because the reality is, a 15, 16-year-old permanently excluded and a 12-year-old permanently excluded are very different things and very different trajectories that we could look at for them. And when I think about my own children, we say, what are we going to do with these children? Because they don't go away. They're out there somewhere. And, say there's a kid in my son's school at the moment, there isn't, but hypothetically, who's, on their way to needing support, to needing these things. Now, we can address it now at the age of 7, and stand a better chance, I think, of trying to address it. We can leave it till secondary and, try and address it there. We can leave it till 16. We can do all these things. We can ignore it, push them out, whatever. We can 16 and they can be thrown to the wolves. But then my son's going to have to drink in a pub with him at 18. I'm going to have to drive on the roads with this kid when they're 23. I'm going to have to, bump into them walking down the street at 30. These people will exist. And I think something needs to be done. I think the big issue is we're not very effective at it at the moment, because I think there's too many factors and it takes too long for these things to work out what's happened to the young person. And
you've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio.
Worse,
tune in live and listen really back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
It's very tone deaf, I think, to be doing things like the reward tricks that Yasmin has discussed, or the table tennis tables that Tom has discussed. Because we know what people are going to say, because everyone says it all the time, right? And how that image is managed. Now, they might need extra support. They might need access to trips. All of those things are true in themselves. But we also know that this is going to inflame the situation really badly, because you're taking perceived naughty children and give them rewards. And so it will always inflame. I think, going back to the article we started on, I think it's deliberately inflaming, right?
Yeah.
It's deliberately inflaming because this article is designed to say, right, to the readers, Labour want to put violent children in your child's school.
Yeah, I get that. Right? I've no problem with the article.
But
the criticism of the article, I've no problem with it.
There are already violent children in our schools. That's what we need to address. Not the ones who might be coming in. there's already ones in our schools, right? There's already children who need support. It's not a matter of, you know, where they've come from, what school they've transferred into. I think the fact that the big horror should be not, oh, you might have a violent pupil transferred in. It should be, hang on, are you telling me there was a violent pupil at another school? You know, this isn't a new violent pupil that's appeared in the country that's magicked out of the ether.
We've responded to that violence, and you made one of my favorite phrases, Nate. You keep saying it, all right? And, you know, we've responded to violence by saying they need more support. That support. Funding, support. I've never heard anybody say in response to violence, they're going to have to take responsibility for that.
Oh no, that is.
I'm afraid I'm afraid. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm not saying
that is part. That is part of support. That is part of support.
Yeah,
though,
sure,
right?
sure. But I'm saying
taking personal responsibility for things is part of what all of this needs to be, and maybe that's again part of what we need to say. As a
general societal conversation, we have stepped way off towards whatever happens. It's to do with lack of support. It's to do with the adults not addressing needs. It's to do with the adults not teaching the kids well enough. It's to do with systems failing. It's to do with not having enough funding.
I see what you're saying.
Every time we never go to, they shouldn't have done that. That's just out of order, mate.
You're basically saying we've got an excuses culture.
No, they do. They shouldn't have done it. They need to take personal responsibility for it. That's what they need help with. I would agree, however, right, that we have a problem with taking personal responsibility for things as a culture because we elected a blinking prime minister in Boris Johnson who couldn't take personal responsibility for anything.
I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you, but it doesn't come back to that. This started way before Poco. Trust me.
Yeah, but people don't take personal responsibility for things
it's a culture.
In general, right?
Yeah.
So, saying that we expect children to take personal responsibility for something, they need to learn how to do that.
Well, it's also
right?
culture.
They need to learn that.
It's like no matter what I do, I'm entitled to X, Y, Z. It doesn't matter what I do, I'm still entitled to it because of whatever, right? Because I'm a citizen of the nation, right? There's no sort of reasoning behind it. It's just I'm entitled to it because this is what everyone's entitled to, right? We used to have sort of even in the 90s, right? It's like if you did something wrong, it's like you've done something wrong. Like, yeah, but it doesn't matter that I've done something wrong. I'm still entitled to it. Yeah, but you've done something wrong. Like, I think we've just moved. I'm not saying some of what you're saying. I genuinely get what you're both saying on some particular levels with some particular examples of kids. The 12-year-old who's been excluded, who has an anger problem from whatever their parents have passed to them and they don't know how to process it and they lash out and whatever, and then they end up getting excluded. Again, coming back to what I said right at the beginning, I've no doubt there's exceptions to what I'm saying. I'm just talking that in general terms, we have landed at a place where we're not talking about the 1 in 10, we're talking about the 9 in 10, and we've now reached a place where we're saying, well, we just need to keep piling more money into this problem. We don't need to address the problem. What we need to do is say, we need more money. We need more funding. We need more support. We need more.
Can I just say?
Don't get it.
This show is brought to you by John Cat. Yeah.
Go on, are you going to finish it, or are you just going to say that?
Finish it off. This show is brought to you by John Cat Educational, publishers of books for professional development. Use code JCTTR2425 for 20%, 10% or 20%? 20% off. I did that from the top of my head. And
very good.
And I've missed 37 minutes so far of Love Island for you.
Yeah,
impressed. This is our longest episode, even though it's only our second.
Thank God for ITV. Wow. No, but speaking of culture of entitlement, thank God for ITV on demand.
you know. You told me this would be a fun one, and this always happens.
This is what I mean. This is why I throw in. This is why
I
throw
do.
in exclusion.
I keep going through the stories until it hits on something.
Here's a funny one. Teachers don't have board runners.
John made a comment. He said, I was excluded near exam time. I was told by certain teachers not to turn up to exams. Only ever had low-paid jobs and no further education available to me. A little more help, I do think my life would have ended up different. I can see Yasmin nodding in a very empathetic way.
No, that really touches me. That honestly really touches me.
She's right. I agree.
I feel like things might even be marginally better now for children in terms of the options that they have, because there is so much more awareness of the impact of exclusion. Sure. And someone my age or above, like, you couldn't get into college, like you couldn't, like, context is important, like I was saying, and exactly as Nathan said, a 12-year-old and 16-year-old getting excluded is completely different. Yes, you might have disrupted 5,000 lessons, as you said, Tom, up until you were 12, but then you might have done really, really well up until 16 and genuinely changed your ways. But you couldn't apply to most, colleges. You probably couldn't apply to any sixth form because you had a permanent exclusion on your record. It's something that followed so many people around, irrespective of the changes that they made. And that really touches me because of that, because there's always anyway, because excluded children also become adults in society later on, so it's to the benefit of everyone.
There's always an opportunity for somebody, a kid or an adult, to turn it around. There's always an opportunity, right? It doesn't matter whether you've got 8 table tennis courts, whether you've got 3 trips a week, or whatever you've got. There is a chance for you to turn it round. Living in a horrible situation, there's still a chance to turn it round. Right? There's still a chance to turn it round. Right? I'm living in a much more terrible place than I was in mainstream school X down the road that had fantastic facilities. But I'm here, and I've now got a chance. I know I made choices that were wrong. I've now got a chance to turn it round, and that is going to start now, right? And I'm going to turn it round. Anyone can do that. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, by the way, but like anybody can do it. Can sort of turn it around over time. It's not easy, but you have got the opportunity, regardless of what's going on around you. Saying, there's this lack of this and lack of that, and these guys haven't got that, and this guy. At some point, everybody, if they want to turn it around, has got to turn around at some point and go, this is on me now. I've got to take responsibility. I've got to make the right choice. And it really doesn't matter what's going on around me, because I know that in the last 5 years, I've basically blown a lot of opportunities. I've ended up here. Now I've got to make the choice to turn it around. And at some point, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can't, as a society, completely wash your hands. All I'm saying is, let's get to a place where it's a little bit more balanced, a little bit less sort of one way to the other way, because we've gone from one way, which was literally caning kids, and literally corporal punishment in assemblies. That was what assemblies were for, right? We've gone from corporal punishment assemblies to where we're at now. We've gone from one extreme, in my opinion, to another extreme. So what John's saying, perfectly valid. We don't know John's situation. We don't know what he was excluded for, but we know that John's saying it's affected him in a negative way. But all I'm saying is, my view, we've gone from one extreme to another extreme. We should be somewhere in the middle.
I think the hardest thing, Tom, to take, right, is you run parallel lives, run sliding doors with 2 children that right? And they can be from the same estate. They can have the same family setup. They can have the same traumas, the same things. And one can be successful and one can be permanently excluded. And I think as a profession, we do not know particularly well what the difference between those 2 paths is, right? Between the kid who in mainstream is not getting all of those trips, but has their head down, is doing their work, is struggling with homework, in a shared bedroom with multiple siblings, and the one who isn't successful, is causing trouble and is getting excluded from school. I don't think as a profession we know where those paths diverge or how to address them.
No, we don't. They're just individual. Individual people respond differently to.
We have choices. We have consequences. I don't need to know why those two.
I agree with Nathan. I completely agree with you. I think it's really important.
So we can search for a reason and excuse for child A.
No, so that we can prevent it.
Yeah.
Right. And also, I would say, so that we can direct support. Well, that's what I'm saying. We don't know. How do you prevent, right, a child going one path and another child going a positive path, a negative path?
You could
okay, wait. Everybody stop. Everybody stop. We're talking about like predicting the future and changing the courses of individual people's lives. I teach kids how to use apostrophes. That is my job. I teach kids how to appreciate Shakespeare. I teach kids how to structure an argumentative essay. I teach kids how to answer those stupid questions on the stupid exams that don't actually want you to do what they seem to think they're asking you to do. That's my job, okay? My job is not to predict behavior outside of school based on family circumstances. What the hell have schools turned into?
No, we also teach PSHE. We also teach British values. So all of this kind of stuff.
We also do data analysis.
Yeah. So all of this stuff about I just teach my subject is not true. We teach PSHE. We teach health and well-being. We teach all of these other things that are included within the broad and balanced curriculum at primary and at secondary that is designed to make a rounded citizen.
But I don't think PSHE secondary or in primary is going to make is the defining. There are systems of play that are bigger than us. There are things going on that are bigger than us. I think one of the things Tom is trying to say is that we're not in a position to be able to foresee or control or predict or whatever. All we can do is try to be the educational institution that we are and respond to what comes to us, rather than trying to.
But we can. But part of our role is to refer to other agencies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like I get Rae's sentiment.
Part of our role is to, pass on information when needed. So everyone should be referring on to social services. That happens through schools. Yeah. People refer to support for drug abuse through schools. Right. These things are things to do. Right.
Yeah. So we pass on. We make referrals. But if we're doing all of that, there still isn't the support. The wider system, social services.
Yeah.
So have you spoken to a social worker recently about their caseload? Like these bigger systems are not adequately. They're not able to do what they need to do. So we're not able to do what we need to do. Like people are stepping so far out of their roles right now to try and keep these kids safe and keep people's heads above water. And I just don't think. I think the thing about spending money and where money's allocated and the funding and what we're trying to accomplish, not a single player within all these systems is able to do the right thing or do the right thing correctly, because everything is such a mess right now. So it's not just up to schools. And I get what Tom is where Tom's coming from with sometimes it's just our job to respond to things and to issue consequences or sanctions or refer things on to somebody else. It's not our job.
But Rae, I get your sentiment completely. Like teachers are massively overloaded and then on top of that, loads of public services have been decimated. But like my perception of Nathan's point here is, like we do more than just, teach in our classroom. And what he's saying, I don't think is, just like the individual teacher. There's policies, there's loads of things that influence like the way schooling and all of these things are shaped on like a national level. And I just think, there is so much data analysis. There's so many different strands where we do predict the future or extrapolate things, whether it's what a child might go on to attain or, there's so many variables in school that is discussed and talked about. And all Nathan is saying is we all benefit from knowing what causes such a huge disparity between children when they have all the same variables
because individuals
my point is that's human life, right?
Yeah.
I'm really,
I don't understand really what the point being.
I'm genuinely confused. Because when I teach history, I show them a photograph of blooming Hitler in his school class with 30 kids, and he's one of those kids in the school photograph, right? So they're all humans. We didn't know that one of them was going to decide to do what he did, and all the others would now not be known who they are, and they're just on a school picture. That's life. That's just life. I'm really struggling to see what the main point is.
Okay, your school does data analysis of attendance.
Yes.
Yeah? Your school does data analysis of exam results, right? Your school does data analysis of behavior. All schools do these things. And the reason they do these things is to target intervention and support where it's needed. Your school does data analysis of your subject's exam results so that they know whether they are targeting it at the level 7s because they need to push up a bump there, or the level 5s because they need to push up a bump there. They do it at attendance because they need to know if they're targeting persistent absentees, or if they're targeting to push their their disadvantaged students because they're not attending. All of these things exist, right? How does your school target to reduce exclusions and permanent exclusions beyond the after the fact that they've happened?
Again, controversial one from old Tomboy once again, but the problem is the target culture on reducing exclusions, the target culture, the culture of we need to reduce our exclusions by X amount to be able to be seen as inclusive and good and all.
That's
the rest
not what he's saying, though. Sorry,
I'm saying like, yeah. How do you reduce serious incidents at your school?
Okay, that's different.
By having a robust behavior policy, by having a good culture, by having a good environment for kids to work in, to be in. It's all those things we talk about all the time. That's what we do.
Okay, and so in it, yeah, and so in any analysis, we would look at where that works and where that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? Right. And
sometimes that would no clear answer to that.
Yeah.
But that's
what
okay.
I'm saying.
That's okay.
That's what I'm saying. That we don't know. There's so much that we don't know that we're trying to answer questions about.
But if we don't know, we don't know. So what's the point in going into it? If we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't. That's what I'm saying. Like there's no one.
So you're saying there's two kids that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Kid A, kid B. They grow up in exactly the same environment. They do exactly the same thing. One of them makes the right choices. One of them makes the wrong choices. We need to know why. Then we say we don't know why, but we still need to do what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying that as an educational as a profession, we don't know, right? I'm saying that we can talk about all of this stuff. We can look at things generally, right? That might work or might help. But I think we're in a mess at the moment of knowing actually, right, beyond reducing exclusions through just not excluding, right? Yeah. I don't think there is. I haven't heard, at a big scale, at a macro scale, maybe, of people saying, like, as a whole school, we've got a behavior policy, right? So we get a lot of talk about that, right? And then you get at the very other far end, you get this one child we are spending a lot of money on, right? Which is the other far end, okay? Where are we in between?
I mean, my opinion is just the same as I've said. My opinion is we have robust behavior policies. We have choices and consequences for everybody that are the same for everybody. We value every kid, but we also have, our rules, our boundaries. We have good teaching. We have good colleagues. We create a joyful atmosphere. We try to. We give all the opportunities we can. And then it's up to individual choice.
But that's like saying, why would a school ever do intervention for a subject? You've all had 4 hours of English, science, and maths this week. you know, it's just life. Like, you know, it's up to you what you get in your GCSE. Like, we don't do that. It is normal.
But that's
to
when
kind
you
of
know.
preempt.
That's when you know what needs to happen to intervene. What Nathan is talking about is a situation where we don't have a clue.
No, but
you can't intervene in something you don't know or understand.
But a lot of the time, what we don't know and what we don't understand hasn't actually been looked into on a massive scale. And like, in my opinion, like, for example, he, you know, a lot of what he described, it like, I grew up on a council estate. I don't think there are many people who've been interested in understanding what it's like to grow up with a single parent on income support, you know, be free school meals, live in an overcrowded council house. Like, why would some children go on to do well at school and then others don't? Like, do you see what I mean? Like, I see what Nathan.
Two kids in the same context, so that what you've said becomes irrelevant because he's talking about two kids who were grown up.
No, but
same
like
context.
A lot of what he said has like overlaps with experiences like I've had, you know. So like, what I'm just trying to say is,
which bit?
No, but I'm saying in the example that I'm giving, if, you know, myself and even
what he said relates to what you've just said.
No, so like earlier he mentioned variables. You know, he compared two children. I can't remember exactly what he said now.
Who were in the same context, exact same context, two kids.
Yeah, and so am I.
No. Yeah. But I'm saying what you've just described for yourself, Yasmin. You could be one of those kids he's just described, and the other kid would be in exactly the same context as you.
Yes, exactly. So but what I'm saying is. No, it isn't though. I feel like I've gotten confused now. But like, what I was trying to say is, a lot of the time when children are excluded, or they have these, you know, variables in common, or they're from like a poor background, like, I feel like a lot of the things that can place more hurdles in your path aren't the things that on a national scale people are interested in considering, whether there are trends or whether there are things that can be prevented. A lot of people just have a passive opinion on it because it doesn't affect everybody, or they're just not they're people that are already, you know, marginalized. And again, it doesn't apply to everybody, but that's what I'm just trying to say. Like, I see what I completely understand what Nathan is saying. I don't think it's that confusing.
Well, I do.
I'm a little bit, yeah. I think why I'm confused is because I see this so much more as like individual. Maybe I'm attributing too much, what's the word I'm thinking for? Too much like agency to people whose brains are still very much in development. But like, every individual is unique and more than just their circumstances and their traumas and their hurdles and their whatever. And I don't think we're ever going to have an answer to why did child A make a decision and child B make a different decision, because their brains are different, because people are different.
But I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. I think Ray, I do get what you're saying, but like, I don't think that's what the question is. I think the question is, how have these variables influenced them differently, and on a wider scale, is there any consideration that can be given to, like, are there any patterns that can be identified so that preventative strategies or just general knowledge about these variables could then be used to influence, you know, schools and their demographics and their problems.
When a child enters adult life at 18 plus, right, out there, they're going to have exactly the same challenges, rules, obligations, turmoils, things to deal with as the next person. They're going to have to obey, if you like, the rules of society in the same way that the next person is once they hit 18 and they go out into the world. And you know, my view is we're trying to prepare all kids for that scenario. So if we start saying, hang on, I'll just finish it. So if we start saying, okay, kid A, you know, and I get what you're saying, kid A, you know, you've had a tougher time than kid B, you know. So we're gonna it's not gonna happen once they're 18. No one's gonna ask him.
No, hang on.
Hey,
I've got a question.
What's your background?
No, but I've got a question for you. Like NEET, the category NEET, not education, employment, and training. Yeah. That's often measured up until 25. So do you know what I mean? And who is most likely to be in NEET at 25? And how do local authorities know that? By looking at these variables. Do you see what I mean? So you know who is most likely to not be in education, employment, and training in a particular area or local authority at 25, which is a good couple of years into adulthood.
But the law's going to start for everybody at 18, right? The law's going to start really at 16 in the same level. Law's just going to start.
Like, who's against that? Like, yeah, but that's fine. Like, and the overwhelming majority of people like get through that perfectly fine. But like, my point is, if these things weren't important, or considering variables weren't important, why would things like, who is NEET be measured well into someone's 20s? And why now do schools, measure who goes on to be NEET or who goes on to higher or further education, post 16 and 18 at schools? Why is it important? Why do we look into these things? Why is a secondary school keeping tabs on someone that's 25? Why do unis call people years after they've graduated to find out what they're doing? Like, longitudinal studies it's how we've historically always learned social trends and then used it to help generations to come. Like, I totally get what Nathan is saying.
Like, I think this the thing for me where it is hard, right, is there should be a system or something that we can do, right, to improve education for all, to improve education for the ones whose lessons are being disrupted, to support the people where they need it, to support families across the board for everyone, right? And if we accept that everyone is entirely individual and every circumstance is entirely unique, then that means every solution is going to have to be potentially entirely unique and entirely bespoke, which to some extent it can be. But that really hampers us in doing things across the board that will help. Now, where we do this in education all the time with things like the pupil premium funding, that exists because on average, we know that people from disadvantaged backgrounds do less well at school. So pupil premium funding exists to support schools where there are a significant amount of them to do something there. I'm just suggesting maybe there needs to be a behavioral equivalent, right? Or maybe we need to start thinking in a slightly different way around working out what works. Because there are some things that do work, but most people, even those, who are against exclusion, and this isn't really a debate about exclusion or not, but most people who are against exclusion are against it because they believe there to be an exclusion to prison pipeline, right? Which suggests that everything post-exclusion doesn't work, right? Or certainly doesn't work well. So we know that part doesn't work from both sides. We know that kids are still getting excluded. So we know there's a gap in the system somewhere in dealing with preventing incidents. So we know that just a purely good, solid school behavior structure doesn't work entirely for everyone. And I'm not saying that like we're going to have 100% system everywhere, right? But can we improve it slightly so that we are catching more before they fall? And that could be social services. It could be things like, we know Sure Start actually helped this before it was cut. It was something that really supported these things. And I would personally rather spend the money early and preventative than spend it late in a hope that a bunch of ping pong tables and talks from people who've been to prison are going to do anything for a 16-year-old who's bringing a knife to school.
It's too late by that point.
Ray and Tom's faces are killing me.
Right. So we need to predict.
I've put across my.
No, I agree.
So we need to predict to spend that money early and try and prevent. Because a child who is engaged...
I agree with that. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, this is what I've been saying. By the time they get, to us...
not where we spend it. My issue is how much we spend and how that's
by the time
elsewhere.
They get to us and things are kicking off and we're trying to deal with it. It's too late because stuff's already like, if you want to actually prevent things, the onus and the pressure and the focus and the effort and the money and the funding needs to go into families, communities, early years, because then there's little old apostrophe teacher trying to deal with X, Y, and Z. And like the die's been cast years ago.
Yeah. Have you guys ever heard of Reach Academy? The school. Feltham, there's a school, in Feltham, that I once visited one day, and they basically do that. So they like consider how from birth what a child is exposed to will probably like they preempt that. And I don't want to speak for them because I might have like completely misunderstood everything, but like my perception when I went there was what happens to a child even preschool is going to affect their behavior when they're in school. And so they had all sorts of things on offer, like prenatal classes. I think it was like baby and mum classes, like loads of, basically considering the community impact in schools. So like every parent, and I believe the school were like had a very close relationship and were involved in things beyond what typically a school would do for families or what they'd be aware of about a family, if that makes sense. And I honestly found it so interesting. So I just thought I'd put it out there, Ray.
I mean, there's no solution.
To like look into it.
There's no solution currently unless we spent twice as much money as we spend currently for a 10-year period, right? You know, to spend the money afterwards where we're currently spending it and spend the money before where we need to spend it. So we're already stuffed, right? But I would challenge anyone to find me a scalable solution that works after the event, right? Because I don't think there are ones. There might be some places that are doing good work, but they're doing expensive work after the fact, right? And actually, expensive work after the fact is not a solution, right? And so Pru's, as good a work as they do, and I've seen some fantastic ones, is expensive money after the fact, right? And that's not solving the problem for me.
I've missed a whole episode of Love Island.
Talking
about 2 hours,
we have solved nothing. So that was a great investment of 2 hours we've had into every issue we've talked about. We solved none of them.
We did solve one, I think, didn't we? We solved private schools.
Not really. No.
We solved private schools.
Yeah, no one cares.
Shut up.
I didn't even comment on that one. I was saving all my energy. Like I feel like I woke up when we got to the bit about exclusion.
Yeah, no one cares. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us once again. Thanks to John Cat for sponsoring. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for leaving a comment if you have. Do remember to like and subscribe if you've made it this far. 2 hours. Probably not if you have. Thanks. So, we'll be back impromptu. This is going to be impromptu weekly. We'll be back soon. Take care, guys. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.